Now we're going to take a look at some using these offset codes. I'm going to exit out of that. That's a, by the way, the field finish inspector is a really nice tool for a small data set. If you've got 10,000 points or 5,000 points in your coordinate file or something, it's not going to work out so well because it, as you can see, it redraws the whole data set every time I make one single change. So if you've got a lot of changes to make, you're going to probably not enjoy using that. So on this side of the table, I'm going to turn off my break lines so you can see the different colors. So I just froze those. This line was edge of pavement, and this line is called curb. So what there's supposed to be is an actual curb here. So one of the things you can do is to offset this manually when you hit these curbs. At least that's one good use for it. It also works really well with things like retaining walls. But this is going to offset a curb both horizontally, vertically, or both. So the way it works is if my code is curb and I hit space and then the special code is H, I shorten that. By default, it's OH for offset horizontal. So I just shorten that to H, followed by the number. Again, if it's to the left, it's a negative. So let's say it's a negative half a foot curb. So let's just say we're building basically a vertical piece of curb. So say horizontal to the left, 0.5 feet, space V for vertical offset, and 0.5 higher. So it's, again, negative would go down, positive is up, and I'm shooting the flow line, so the back of curb is going to be half a foot higher than that. So this works really well if the curb is consistent. If the curve is busted up and all over the place, up and down, it might be quicker to actually shoot the front and the back of the curb. But in a lot of instances, at least in our work, we can use this a lot because the curb is consistent enough, and the top of the curb is not typically a critical elevation on residential surveys like this kind of example here. Denoting what the curb is important, but I'm not trying to design ADA accessibility from an offset shot here. So just keep in mind how you're using this. But all I have to do is put that on the first one, and it will remember all the rest of the shots as we go along. So when I come back and process field to finish, I now get two lines, and you saw it thaw temporarily, but if I thaw that, I actually get both front and back in 2D and in 3D. So I get two break lines now instead of just one. You can look at these. If you remember the command cube, I just type it at the command line. But if you look at drawing viewer, I can actually window this all in, and you can see my site in 3D. Don't really need that colored. And you can see that line is offset vertically and horizontally. So when I go to contour this now, I've already got both break lines in there. So again, this only had to be coded on the very first shot. It remembers that for all the rest of them until you either end that line string or change the curb height. So let's say this was a consistent half a foot in width, but the vertical changed somewhere along the way after this, let's see, after this curb line, like so it's the point right here, the curb is knocked down and drops down to only 2/10 vertically. So all I have to do is add in the vertical offset because that's the only one that changed. So again, it's consistently half a foot in width, but the height changed. So you could conceivably do this on every shot, but again, it might be quicker to shoot both. But all I have to do is change that one that worked. I mean, the one that changed, reprocess that. And at this point, I'm going to have type cube. I just want to look at that one line, that point. And if I put on a vertical exaggeration scale, you can see how the curb height transitioned from the last shot down to this one. You can see it goes from a half a foot down to 2/10 of a foot. And it could go back up, whatever. But again, I only had to code where it changed. So it remembers that first code. I call them sticky codes. They stick. Now, another thing that's really quite useful when picking up curb lines is to use a curb template. So I'm going to go in here real quick and get rid of these offsets. Just get it back to curb. And I'll just reprocess that real quick, make sure I don't have anything. So we're back down to a single line. So I could go to my curb code, and I can go to line type, and I can add a template to that line type. So I hit edit and create a new, I'll put it there, I guess. How can I call it? Vertical curb. I guess I just got to name this TPL file. So I'm creating a template file. Incidentally, this is the same TPL file that's used in Road Network and so the civil programs. So you can actually use curbs that are defined in those programs. They actually have some predefined curbs in there that you can use. So there's a vertical curb, and I'm going to create that now. And then I simply add. It's not right, same as left. I'm going to turn that on. I'm going to add a vertical jump of 0.5. I'm going to create that same curve line with a half a foot by half a foot, only this time with this, I can actually create a true vertical curve line. So the horizontal distance is 0 because I'm just going to jump straight up. And then in this template routine, though, you do need to add template IDs. They're used throughout the software, and they're not so important here, but they are necessary. So I'm just going to say TC for top of curve. And it draws it there, and then I'm going to add the slope is 0, and the horizontal distance is 0.5, and I'll say BC for back of curve. And you don't have to worry about these template IDs interfering with your code table, your codes themselves. This is seen by the program only. So you can create any complicated curb type that you want just by drawing these lines. So if you have something that starts at the front and then goes down to a gutter line and then kind of back up around a curb, you can create multiple lines in here by just simply adding those. So I'm going to leave this one just a simple vertical curb, and I hit OK. And I'm going to save that, and then when I draw it again, I get what looks to be the same, but if you look really, really, really close, there's actually 2 lines there, the top and the bottom. If I use my cube, you can see what is a true vertical curb. So when you create contours, that's going to go up and over just like it's supposed to. With just the straight offset, you're actually going to kind of making a triangle out of that. So it depends on how important that is, but it's kind of nice to have your surface model reflect what's actually out there. And that's a real quick, easy way to do it. So in practice, I have about 5 curb types. I'm working in Massachusetts, and that's about what we have, and that covers most of everything. And they're vertical, or there's a couple slant curbs, wedge-shaped curbs we have, and then there's slanted granite, there's concrete. So I think I have about 5 of those, and they're coated in there. And if the curb, again, is a pretty consistent curb, especially like on as-builts, it's an incredibly good tool because you can put that in once, and all your curb lines are drawn. It saves you from shooting that back a curb shot. So it saves a ton of line work. All right. Also, you can control that template. So I have that set as a default for the a half a foot reveal. You can also control that template by using your vertical offset. So if this was a V.2, that means it's going to start that template with a 0.2 reveal instead of a 0.5 reveal. So you can override that. And then again, that will stick through that line string. So, if it changes on every one, every curb shot, again, you might be quicker to just go ahead and shoot both sides. But again, if it's a consistent curb, really nice tool there. All right, I'm going to, I'm just going to pause for 1 second and see if anybody's got any questions about line work. I'm going to get into symbols and annotations next. 1 hour is not very much time here.
Well, Doug, we do have one question from Scott. Can you select multiple points at once to edit point codes?
Yes. Yep, you can do it in both field to finish inspector. Just be careful with this, because if I had my edge of pavement, let's say edge of gravel, and I've got all of these, I can select by holding my shift, and I've got everything. So you see it now says varies, and if I change it, they're all going to change to be the exact same thing. The reason why you have to be careful about that is because if they're all the exact same thing, you might lose your PCs and PTs and other little things that you have in there. That's one way of doing it. I will tell you that in practice, if somebody miscoded everything, they misspelled the word curb, because we're surveyors after all, I actually go into the code table, the CRD. So if I hit edit points, I'm reading directly for the CRD, and I use search and replace. And I would type, if they misspelled curb, it's supposed to be curb. I will hit the column to search as description and hit replace all. That's the 2 quick ways of doing that. All right, let's look at points. I'm going to start with an iron pipe. I'm going to show you one more thing, though, incidentally. When we talked about beginning and ending lines, so I have beginning of a line here. I don't have an end here because I jumped across the side of the road and it had a different code. So if to begin and end lines, you can use the B and the E. When I drew any of these lines, I don't have a begin on any of them, because if it's already coded in the code table, coded, whatever you want to call it, it is set to be a 3D, 2D, or both lines. Soon as it sees that code, EP, curb, DRV, whatever it is, as soon as it sees that, it starts drawing lines. So I really don't have to tell it to begin. I just have to tell it when to end. Or like in this case, I went EOG on one side, EOG1 on the other side. So because if I would have connected sequentially, I'd get a big Z here. So but you can force line work that doesn't normally have a line work associated with it by adding a beginning. So for example, an iron pipe, that's set to just be a point. If I was to say iron pipe begin, just space B, and process this, I'll actually get line work drawn around my boundary. So when you're in the field, you can take any code and tell it to begin. So, which is really handy. Sometimes you need to have you create a shape, and it's easier to draw it in the field than it is to write a sketch. Just remember, you can connect any kind of line work you want. So let's take a look at this code, iron pipe. So I'm going to get rid of the begin now. The point block is on a layer called monuments. The monument, that little circle, is also on a layer called monuments. So again, we have default point numbers. If I freeze the point number and the elevation, they all go away. If I just freeze the description, they all go away because they're all on the same layer. So again, I have an issue with dealing with, get rid of those break lines. How am I going to control that? Because when what you do is you have to think about what you want your final plan to look like. So I might want this called out to be an iron pipe. So let's just use that one to begin with. So if I go to edit codes and I go to my iron pipe, so I should have a category called monuments. You can see that right here. All right, so we'll try to move this out of the way here so you can see this. So again, this is a point block, and the whole block goes on the layer called which is the main layer, which is called monuments. The symbol also goes on the same layer, the way this is set up. So if I want the symbol, the point number, and the layers to go on, to be on separate layers, so I can freeze these descriptions, but not these descriptions, there's two options. In reality, there's more than two options. You can do a combination of both, but really essentially it comes down to two options. And one of them is to use the point block itself, the attributes in the point block, to be your description. So right now it already says iron pipe B. Well, on that iron pipe, let's see, I'm on the wrong one, iron pipe. I probably don't want to have my raw description on because I don't want the B in there if I was to have that in there. I think I want that off. So no matter what I put in here, it's going to say IP. I could override that and say I want it to say iron pipe. So the code does not have to equal the description. So when you have raw description on, it's going to be whatever you put here, but if you turn it off, you can put whatever you want in that description. So I want to say iron pipe. And maybe I'll even write the word found. So IP is iron pipe found. It all goes on the main layer, monuments. However, a distinct point layer in this situation with just a point doesn't quite work as swift as it does with line work. With line work, it just simply moves it into a different layer and you're done. Monuments, because of there's the point block layer, there's a little node in there, which I have set to be just a dot. It's got a layer for this symbol, and it's got a layer for all three attributes. So if I want to make use of just the attributes, what I do is I have to come down here and look at the attribute format. It's set to attribute block. So we'll leave it there. And then just below that, separate attribute layers. It defaults to none. If it's on none, that's really kind of a lie because it still separates them. It separates them on PNT, number, description, and elevation, those three PNT layers that I showed you. So it still separates them. But if you want control over that, you hit points, symbols, or both. And hit both. And then this highlights, and you can hit set. And you can now set these on any layer you want. So let's say I want the point itself to go on a layer called points dash monuments. So maybe I want those separate from the other points. Point number layer, yeah, I'll leave that on monuments. Heck, let's just do this. And this will be dash NO, and that's then dash EL EV. Then the point description layer. Maybe I want it on a layer called monuments dash text. And then the symbol. I'm just going to have that on the monuments layer. So you can do anything you want with this. This is just an example, but I'm going to set it up like that, and I hit OK. And I'm just going to reprocess 0.135 here. So now what happens is when I freeze the description layer and the elevation layer, my monument layer that still stays visible. So if I want those on my plan when I print it, I can make those visible. So in practice, I have not too many layers, but I have a separate layer set up like this for monuments and control points, just so I can do a stakeout sheet or something like that and have those visible and be able to quickly see the point numbers and descriptions. So these are still set to the defaults. That's that one. So when you go to create your final plan, let's just go ahead and process everything so they all come out that way. Oh, and incidentally, I can still do the begin thing here, and I would get a line around there. That doesn't work very often for me because very, very seldom are all the corners in on a lot. But when I go to make my plan now, I can freeze my point layer. I can freeze numbers, elevations, and descriptions. And my monuments, I don't want the monuments elevations or the point numbers, just the, and actually the point itself doesn't even have to be, well, yeah, it does. The text is on. Okay, there we go. So that starts to make it look like my plan. And I have this attribute that's on a separate layer. It's on the layer text, monuments dash text. And I'll just set it to a different layer to demonstrate that. I mean, different color. So there's my monuments text. So it's an attribute. So it's connected to the point. So if I double click on this, I get my point information. So there's one option, and that is to use attributes.